My name card had been moved before I even took my coat off. It sat 3 tables over from where Dana had told me I'd be tucked beside 2 retired vendors and a widow I knew only by face, while the family table near the front held my daughter, my son-in-law, their friends from Naples, and a row of smiling people young enough to still believe a microphone improved them. Nothing was said about it at first. That was the part that made my stomach go cold. At 71, you learn to pay attention to what nobody explains. The ballroom at Gulf Shore Country Club smelled like roast beef lemon polish and those little sterno cans under silver trays. Outside, it was one of those January evenings Florida likes to pretend are winter. Men came in wearing sport coats instead of sweaters and talking too loudly about golf. Women with hard bracelets and smooth foreheads stood in little circles beneath the blown-up photographs of Graham through the years. Graham at groundbreakings. Graham in a hard hat. Graham with a governor. Graham with both hands on somebody else's shoulder, like he'd taught the man how to stand upright. I handed my keys to the valet, walked in with my blazer folded over one arm, and saw the seating chart just past the hostess stand. Dana had told me last Sunday I'd be at her table. "Of course you will," she'd said. "Your family." She had said it the way people say there's coffee in the kitchen. Easy, settled. But there I was, in black script on a cream card at table 9. I stood there long enough for the hostess to glance at me and then politely away. Frank. Dana appeared out of nowhere, all perfume and nerves, in a dark green dress I knew Graham had probably picked because it looked expensive without being loud. She kissed my cheek and touched my wrist with cool fingers. "You made good time?" "I guess I did." She followed my eyes to the chart and smiled too quickly. "Oh, they had to move a few things around." "A few things." "It's fine," she said. "You're still close." Close was true if you measured by carpet, not by meaning. I looked toward the front of the room. The family tables had little white roses in low bowls and folded cream napkins standing up like church collars. Mine had a shorter centerpiece and no sightline to the podium unless I leaned left. Dana gave my arm a little squeeze. "Don't start tonight, okay? It's a big night for Graham." There it was. Not an explanation. A warning. I nodded because that is what I have done most of my life when I could feel the floor shifting under me and didn't yet know whether naming it would make me look wiser or smaller. My late wife Ellen used to say I could outweight weather. She meant it kindly. Toward the end of her life, she said it less kindly. Frank, she told me once in the kitchen after Dana had left in tears over something Graham had said and not quite said. Patience is a virtue until it becomes permission. That sentence came back to me at odd times, usually when I wished it wouldn't. Dana had already turned half away. She was scanning the room with that hostess smile women learn when they marry men who need rooms to go right around them. "You look handsome," she said, not really looking at me. "Did you remember to take your evening pills?" I looked at her then. "Yes." "Good. Let me get you settled." I could have told her I'd been running operations before she was born. I could have told her I managed 3 warehouse expansions, 2 hurricanes, and a strike in '89 with less hand-holding than this. Instead, I let her lead me through the room while waiters in white jackets floated by with bacon-wrapped scallops and little crab cakes on silver trays. Graham met us halfway. He had on a navy suit that sat sharp across the shoulders and the same expression he used in newspaper photos, warm enough to suggest ease, controlled enough to imply standards. He hugged Dana with one arm, then turned to me and put a hand on my elbow. That elbow touch. Men like Graham used it all the time. Friendly on the surface, steering underneath. "There he is," he said. "Looking good, Frank." "Evening." He looked past me for a half-second, checking the room while talking to me. We shifted some seating around. "Less noise over there for you? Easier on the blood pressure?" He said it lightly, smiling. Dana gave a tiny laugh that died right away. I said, "My blood pressure's fine." "Even better," he said, and gave my elbow the gentlest push toward the side of the room. It is a strange thing to feel insulted in a way that leaves you no clean place to stand. If you object, you sound touchy. If you smile, you participate in your own resizing. Table 9 was already half full. A man named Hal Corman, from one of Graham's old vendor accounts, stood when I approached. He was my age or close to it, with suspenders under his jacket and hearing aids he didn't try to hide. I liked him on sight because he looked like a man who had once fixed his own alternator. "Frank Mercer," he said. "Been a while." We shook hands. His wife Louise smiled kindly and moved her purse off the empty chair beside her. Across from them sat a widow named Patty. Something from church, or maybe from one of the holiday open houses Dana used to have before everything got more curated. "Nice table," Hal said quietly after Dana moved away. I gave him a look. He lifted his water glass a half-inch. "Means we've all been judged safe." That got the first real smile out of me all evening. The room filled in. Ice clicked in glasses. Somebody at the bar laughed too hard. A string quartet recording played through speakers hidden somewhere in the ceiling, every note too clean to belong to actual people. At the front, 2 giant screens rotated through photographs of Graham's career like a church slideshow for a man not yet dead. I watched Dana making rounds beside him, touching sleeves, greeting couples, leaning in close when donors or partners arrived. She was good at it. She had always been good at smoothing surfaces. Even as a girl, if Ellen and I argued in the kitchen, Dana would come in asking whether anybody wanted more iced tea. The trouble with children who learn to smooth things is they grow into adults who mistake smoothness for peace. Dinner started with little salads nobody really ate. A waiter asked if I wanted the dressing on the side in the tone people use with nursing home residents and difficult children. I said no, thank you, and he seemed almost surprised. Halfway through the main course, Graham came by with a man in his 50s I recognized from the business pages. Graham rested one hand on the back of my chair. "Doug, this is Dana's dad, Frank. He was around in a lot of the early days. Knows where all the bodies are buried." He chuckled. "Mostly retired from the moving parts now." Doug smiled in that quick, professional way. "Nice to meet you, sir." "Sir, around in the early days. Mostly retired from the moving parts now." I said, "Good to meet you." Graham was already turning the man away before the sentence had fully left my mouth. By the time coffee came, my jaw hurt from holding still. Marlene slid into the empty seat to my right, like she'd been waiting for the opening. My sister wore black slacks and a silver blouse and the face she reserved for foolishness. "You all right?" she asked. "I'm fine." She looked toward the front table, then back at me. "No, you're not." I cut a piece of the dry roll left on my bread plate and set it down again. Marlene leaned closer. "I saw the seating chart." "Did you?" I also saw Dana pretend not to. I let out a breath through my nose. She said, "Don't let them make you feel confused about things you can plainly see. There's value in having one person in a room tell the truth without embroidery." Before I could answer, the lights dimmed. A spotlight came up near the podium. Conversations thinned and then folded into applause as Graham walked to the front of the room, one hand buttoning his jacket. He was good at a room, always had been. Some men are born with that smooth layer on them, like they came out already shellacked. He thanked colleagues, partners, friends. He thanked Dana with practiced warmth. He thanked the teams who made growth possible and the younger leadership that understands where the market is going. He got laughs in the right places, paused in the right places. Even his humility sounded expensive. Then he smiled out over the room and said, "And I do want to say this. Every generation thinks it invented hard work. It didn't. Some men built with sweat, instinct, and grit, and we owe them for getting things off the ground. But scale is a different language. You have to know when to stop thinking like a foreman and start thinking like the future." The room laughed, not loud, not cruel, worse than that, comfortable. I felt the blood climb my neck. At the front table, Dana kept her smile on one beat too long, then lowered her eyes to her lap. Graham lifted his glass. "To building forward." Glasses rose all over the room. I did not lift mine. Nobody at my table looked directly at me for a good 5 seconds. Hal stared at his coffee. Marlene's mouth flattened into a line. Across the room, one of Graham's partners leaned toward another and said something I couldn't catch, and both of them smiled without showing teeth. Then, as the applause began again, I heard a man behind me near the side service station murmur, "Well, once Porter gets the final buyout packet circulated, the old structure won't matter anyway." Another voice answered low and amused, "Depends." Graham said he's got Mercer handled. I sat very still after that. Not because I was weak, because sometimes the only way to keep from saying the wrong thing too early is to feel the whole cut before you move. I kept my hands flat on the table until the applause died down. Marlene turned her head just enough to look at me without making a show of it. "You heard that? I heard it. You want me to say something? No." She gave one short nod like she hated the answer but recognized it. That was my sister. She never confused agreement with understanding. At the front of the room, Graham was still smiling, still receiving the kind of laughter men get when other people have decided their money makes them funnier than they are. A slideshow photo changed behind him. Graham in a hard hat, Graham with a shovel, Graham shaking hands with somebody in Washington. Not one picture from the years before money learned how to photograph him. My coffee had gone lukewarm. I drank it anyway. The room broke into clusters after the speech. Chairs scraped. Silverware clicked against dessert plates. The waiters came out with slices of layer cake and little silver forks. Dana crossed the room toward me with that same fixed smile, except now there was something pinched around the eyes. "You okay?" she asked. I looked at her for a second too long. Why wouldn't I be? "You know what I mean." "No," I said. "I don't believe I do." Her mouth tightened. "Dad." He was speaking broadly. "Was he?" She lowered her voice. "Please don't do this here." I almost laughed. Not because anything was funny, but because there it was again. The trick of it. He could say something in front of 200 people, and if I answered plain suddenly, I was the one making a scene. "I'm sitting at a side table I wasn't assigned to until I arrived," I said. "He just made a joke about men who worked with their hands, not understanding the future, and 10 minutes ago I heard someone say he's got Mercer handled. So no Dana. I don't guess I feel especially social." Color rose in her face, then faded. "You must have misheard." "That what you're going with?" She glanced over her shoulder toward the front of the room where Graham was laughing with 3 men in blue blazers. Then she looked back at me, and for one small ugly second, I saw not guilt, not confusion, but calculation. She was trying to decide which version of this conversation would cost her less. "It's a complicated transaction," she said carefully. "There are a lot of moving parts." I held her gaze. "I know there are." "Yes. But what?" She drew a breath through her nose. "You don't have all of it in front of you." That landed harder than the speech. Not because it was cruel. Because it was practiced. There is a special ache in hearing your own child use the language somebody else has been feeding her. It is one thing to be disrespected by a son-in-law. Men do that sort of thing. Territory and ego are as old as porches. It is another thing entirely to hear your daughter start speaking to you as if your mind needs rounding down for easier handling. I said no. I suppose I don't. She put a hand over mine. "Can we please just get through tonight?" I took my hand back. Not fast, not rude. Seems like everybody else already has. She stood there another moment, then gave me a look I knew from 30 years of parenthood. It was the look she wore when she was a teenager and had broken something in the house, but hadn't yet decided whether honesty would hurt more than delay. Marlene saved her. "Dinah," she said dry as a paper, "go be useful, where all the smiling is." Dinah straightened. "Aunt Marlene, this isn't helping. Wasn't trying to." Dana left with the kind of controlled walk women have when they're angry, but won't allow themselves to look it in the hips. I stared at the half-eaten cake in front of me. Yellow cake, thin frosting, 1 sugar rose, too sweet to be worth bothering with. Marlene said, You remember when Ellen was in the hospital that last spring? I looked at her. She told me they'd try this once you got old enough for it. I leaned back in my chair. She said that to you. She said, Marlene, the first time somebody starts using concern as a leash on Frank, I need you to tell him. For a moment, I couldn't answer. Ellen had been gone 4 years, and still she could reach across a room better than the living. I could see her in that hospital bed at Sarasota Memorial, skin gone thin over the bones at her wrists, still bossing me about the checking account and the sprinkler timer because she knew I'd neglect one and overwater the other. Toward the end, she got sharper, not softer, less interested in comfort, more interested in truth. Patience is a virtue until it becomes permission. I had heard her. I just had not wanted the world she was describing to arrive. Marlene touched the edge of her napkin. You stayed quiet too long because you thought Dana would eventually notice. I looked over at my daughter across the ballroom. She was laughing now at something one of Graham's partners had said, head tipped slightly, one hand at her necklace. Maybe, I said. No, maybe about it. A waiter passed with coffee. Marlene waved him by. What did you sign last fall? That got my full attention. Why? Because I was there the afternoon those overnight envelopes came to your house and you got that look on your face. What look? The one where you pretend everything's ordinary while you start reading every line like a cop. I looked down at the tablecloth. Last September, 2 months after the little stroke, a courier had brought a packet to my house just after lunch. Dana had been stopping by more often then. Graham, too. Fruit baskets, questions about my medications, suggestions about simplifying things. They said it kindly. They said it in the tone people use when they're already moving furniture in their minds. I remember the packet because Ellen's old fountain pen was still in the kitchen drawer, and I took it out before I even opened the envelope. Habit. Respect. I sat at the table where she used to pay bills and spread the papers flat under the hanging light. Governance review, revised succession mechanics, legacy voting provisions. I read everything twice. Then I called Elaine Porter. Elaine had handled the family office work for years. Quiet woman, brown bob cut neat at the jaw. Reading glasses she wore low when she wanted someone to understand she'd stopped being social and started being exact. She came by the next afternoon in a navy sheath dress and sat where Ellen used to sit. I still remember the shape of the late sunlight on the floor by the sliding doors. She walked me through every page. Not downward, not slowly, just plainly. This clause, she said, tapping one section with a capped pen, would have the practical effect of centralizing authority in the executive branch of the family structure once certain health-related thresholds were triggered. Health-related according to who I asked, according to language broad enough to invite misuse. She looked at me over her glasses when she said that. I said, fix it. So we fixed it. Tightened definitions. Preserved senior non-executive approval on legacy matters. Required direct sign-off for any transaction affecting certain distribution rights. Elaine did not tell me what to fear. She did something more useful. She respected the fear I already had enough to make it legible. I signed those pages with Ellen's pen. Then I put the copies in the hall cabinet behind the yellow casserole dish nobody ever used. At the time, I told myself I was just being careful. Now I knew better. Marlene watched my face and let me arrive at it myself. Well, I signed a revised governance review, I said, after I had parts of it rewritten. Her eyebrows lifted. And who thought you wouldn't understand it? I gave a quiet breath. Take your pick. Across the room, Graham had moved near the side service station with 2 men I didn't know, and a woman in a black suit I recognized after a second, Elaine Porter herself. She had a slim leather portfolio tucked under one arm. That hit me strangely. I had not known she was coming tonight. Graham was speaking in that half-lowered executive tone men use when they want to sound relaxed about things they are not relaxed about. Elaine listened without nodding. One of the men beside him glanced down at a tabbed folder in his hand. I stood before I decided to. Marlene looked up at me. "Where you going?" "To stretch my legs." "Frank." "I'm not going to throw a punch in a country club, Marlene. That wasn't my concern." I moved through the room, slowly nodding at people who nodded at me, passing round tables littered with coffee cups, lipstick marks, crumpled napkins, half-finished cake. Near the bar, a jazz trio had started up soft enough to be ignored. The side hallway leading toward the restrooms and service doors was quieter, carpeted in a busy pattern meant to hide stains and time. I stopped short of the service station, close enough to hear, far enough not to intrude. Graham saw me first. His expression changed for only an instant, but I caught it. Irritation. Then the smile slid back on. "Frank," he said. "Everything all right?" Elaine turned. Her face did not change much, but there was a flicker of recognition there. Respect, maybe, or simply attention. "I was about to head out," I said. "Didn't know you were here, Elaine." "Closing details," she said. One of the men with Graham shifted the folder in his hand. A white routing tab stuck out from the top. I saw my name before he angled it down. Mercer, executed. It took me half a second to feel what that did to my chest. Graham stepped in a little, not enough to block, just enough to guide. "We're wrapping some loose ends. Nothing for you to worry about tonight." There it was again. That tone, that smooth little blanket they kept trying to lay over me. I looked at the folder, then at him. Seems like my name's on it. Dana had come up behind me. I heard her before I saw her. "Dad." Just that. One word. Soft warning, ashamed. Elaine adjusted her glasses. "Mr. Mercer," she said, and her voice was so level it quieted the whole patch of hallway. "Since you're here, I should be plain. The transaction could not have closed without your executed approval under the legacy voting provisions. For one good second, nobody said anything. Not Dana, not Graham, not me. Then I looked at Graham, and all at once the whole evening rearranged itself in my mind. The moved seat, the careful hands, the broad jokes, the little phrases about complexity and rest and making things easier. They had not been treating me like a man at the edge of the picture. They had been treating me like a man they thought they had already stepped past. Graham recovered first. That did not surprise me. Men like him built their lives around recovering first. His smile came back, though it sat tighter on his face now, like something borrowed in a hurry. "Well," he said, and gave a soft laugh, meant to make the moment smaller, of course. "We all appreciate Frank's signature on the formalities." Elaine did not move. Neither did I. Dana stood just behind my shoulder. I could feel her there more than hear her, the way you can feel a door left open in winter. I said, "Formalities." Graham spread one hand. "You know what I mean." "No," I said. "I don't believe I do." The two men with him had gone very still. One of them looked at Elaine, then at the folder in his hand, then somewhere over my shoulder, which told me he had just understood he was standing inside something he had not expected to witness. Graham cleared his throat. "Frank, tonight's not the place." "No," I said. "It seems to be exactly the place." His jaw set for just a second. From the ballroom I could hear forks against dessert plates. Low music from the trio. The soft rise and fall of 200 people still enjoying themselves, out beyond the hallway, not yet aware the shape of the evening had changed. Dana said quietly, "Dad?" I turned and looked at her. Not hard, just directly. She had the same eyes Ellen had, though Ellen's had always been steadier. Dana's moved now from me to Graham and back again, as if one of us might provide a version of this she could still live inside. I said, "Did you know?" Her lips parted, closed. That was answer enough. Graham stepped in. "Dana doesn't need to be put on the spot." I looked at him then. That would be a shame, would it? Elaine shifted the portfolio to her other hand. Mr. Voss, she said in the tone of someone stepping carefully around furniture while still meaning to reach the far wall. The executed approval was not ceremonial. The transaction structure preserved senior non-executive sign-off on any matter affecting legacy voting rights and distribution controls. The man with the folder gave up pretending he was invisible and handed it to her. Elaine opened it, cleanly turned one page, then another. There were also amendments, she said, requested by Mr. Mercer during the governance review last September. Graham's face changed then. Not much, just enough. A little color gone at the mouth. A little too much stillness in the shoulders. What amendments, he asked, and for the first time all night, he did not sound polished. He sounded annoyed, then worried, then both. Elaine looked at him over her glasses. The amendments limiting concentration of authority in the executive branch after close. Revised thresholds on incapacitation language, preserved direct consent requirements for certain asset reallocations. Deferred release of portions of the discretionary distribution pool. The words landed one by one. I watched him understand them, not all at once. That was the satisfying part. Piece by piece. The discretionary. He stopped himself and glanced at the men beside him. Excuse us. No, I said. That came out sharper than anything I had said yet, and it stopped him cold. I took one step closer, enough that he could not keep talking around me without making it obvious. You've had all evening to speak in front of people, I said. Seems only fair the truth gets the same courtesy. Dinah closed her eyes for half a second. I could hear my own heartbeat then, not wild, just present. Stronger than they'd counted on. Ellen used to say there were moments in a marriage, in a job, in a life when you could feel the exact second some old arrangement quit breathing. I had not understood her the first time she said it. I did now. Graham dropped the smile altogether. Frank, he said, lower. Now, if you've got concerns about the structure, we can discuss them privately. It isn't the structure I'm concerned about, I said. The structure's fine. I made sure of that. One of the men beside him shifted his weight. Dinah looked down the hallway toward the ballroom, then back at me, as if calculating how fast bad news could travel in a room full of donors and old colleagues. I went on. What concerns me is that the whole evening I've been treated like a man who needed to be placed, managed, and spoken around, while all along the deal you're celebrating still had to pass under my hand. Graham drew himself up. Nobody spoke around you. Marlene's voice cut in from behind me. That's so. I hadn't heard her come down the hallway, but there she was now, purse over one shoulder, mouth set flat as a ruler. She took her place beside me like she had been walking toward this moment since the valet stand. Graham looked at her and said nothing. I said, You moved my seat. That was logistics. You introduced me as if I used to matter more than I do now. Oh, come on. And you stood in front of a room and made a joke about men who built with their hands, not understanding the future. He gave a short, disbelieving laugh. That wasn't about you. No, I said. It was about exactly the kind of man you thought you could safely reduce in public. Dana whispered, Dad, please. I turned to her again, and that hurt worse than anything Graham had done. Don't, I said. She looked stricken, and maybe she was. But there comes a point when stricken is just another late form of comfort. I am not confused, I said to her. I am not tired. I am not some piece of furniture everybody has to walk around carefully, and the ugliest part of this isn't even him. It's that you let me stand in that room and be handled like I was already halfway gone. She flinched. That cost me, more than I had expected. There are sentences a father says only once if he can help it. Some of them do not feel like power while you are saying them. They feel like pulling your own hand through a closing door. Graham tried to recover the ground. Nobody has questioned your dignity. I looked at him and almost pitied him then because he still thought dignity was a word you could preserve after the fact if you said it neatly enough. No, I said. You just questioned my present tense. He frowned. I let that sit there between us. Then I said, quieter. You weren't speaking to me like I was finished, Graham. You were speaking around me like I already was. Nobody moved. Even the hallway seemed to go still around that one. Elaine closed the folder. For the first time all night, Graham looked not angry but exposed. The kind of exposed a man gets when he discovers the version of events he has been relying on only works, if everybody else agrees not to name it. He looked at Dana. Dana did not rescue him. He looked back at me. What exactly did you change? There it was. Not apology, not understanding. Terms. That told me everything else I needed to know. I said I changed what a prudent man changes when he notices people getting too comfortable with his absence before he's actually dead. One of the men beside him stared at the carpet. Elaine spoke again, calm as winter sunlight. Mr. Mercer required that certain discretionary distributions be deferred and that control over several legacy allocations remain outside sole executive influence. He also tightened the language around health-based incapacity triggers. Graham's face hardened. You had no right to. Elaine cut him off without raising her voice. He had every right. I will remember that for the rest of my life. Not because I needed her permission, because it is a rare thing at my age to hear plain truth arrive on time. Graham looked at me differently then, not warmly, not respectfully, not yet, but accurately, and accuracy in a moment like that is enough. Dinah said very quietly, You thought we were trying to push you out. I turned to her. No, I said. I thought you were trying to do it gently. That's worse. She started crying then, and I felt nothing triumphant about it. Only tired. Marlene put a hand on my sleeve. A small touch. Steadying, not stopping. From the ballroom came another swell of laughter. Somebody else's speech beginning the world, continuing in that rude, ordinary way it always does while one family's private fiction breaks open in a side hallway. I looked at Graham one last time. You can celebrate whatever's left of your career tonight, I said. That's your business, but don't ever mistake my restraint for incapacity again. Then I looked at Dana. And don't ever ask me to call it love when what you needed from me was cooperation. I left them there. No shouting, no scene. Just my coat from the check stand, the cool night air on my face, the smell of cut grass and salt coming in off the dock. The valet jogged my car, up with the same cheerful courtesy he'd had an hour earlier. Unaware he was handing keys to a man who had just stepped out of one life and into another. I sat behind the wheel for a minute before starting it. My hands were steady. That surprised me less than it once would have. When I got home, the house was quiet in the deep way only a house can be quiet after midnight. I hung my blazer on the chair in the bedroom instead of the closet. Ellen hated that. Used to say chairs were where order went to die. In the kitchen, I poured the rest of the morning coffee down the sink, rinsed the pot, and set up the machine for dawn out of habit. Then I stood there with one hand on the counter and thought about her. Not in some grand movie way. Just the plain truth of her. The shape of her reading glasses on the end table. The clipped way she said nonsense when men mistook volume for authority. The fact that she had seen this coming before I did and had loved me enough not to soften it. Around 5:30, I woke for good. Old men sleep in pieces. I put on a cardigan over my t-shirt, poured coffee into my thick white mug, and went out to the back porch. The yard was blue-gray with first light. Dew sat on the grass. Somewhere down the block a sprinkler clicked on and began its slow mechanical sweep. I sat in the chair Ellen used to call my tribunal chair because it faced the whole yard and the alley gate besides. For a long time I just held the mug in both hands and listened to the neighborhood come back to life. A garage door humming open. A dog barking once, a newspaper truck 2 streets over. Satisfied was the first thing I felt. Then after that, something sadder and more durable. Not regret, not exactly. More like the ache that comes when a man has finally done what he should have done earlier and knows the delay cost him more than the act itself. At 6:14, a car turned into the driveway slow enough that I knew who it was before I saw it. Dana's sedan. It rolled to a stop beside the hedges Ellen planted the year we moved in. The engine shut off. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the driver's door opened, and my daughter stepped out into the pale morning light, closed the door with both hands, and stood there looking toward the porch like she had come to the only place left where she might still be told the truth.